Hello and welcome to Sprint 60. This was another 2-week sprint, mostly focused on stabilization for the upcoming fine release. We're building the fine code today, and hopefully it will go live GA next week. Next slide. All right, so I'll give the sprint stats. John will highlight us in the community. Dan on the classic UI, Chris K on the service UI, Adam on the providers, Gregg M on Automate, Greg T on the platform, Alberto on the API, Dennis on performance, and Chris B on documentation. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the list of PRs merged across the top 10 repositories. I think this is the first time that the classic UI has outpaced the core repo, the Manageiq repo. That's cool. In total, there were 570 PRs merged across all the repos in our organization, and that kind of gives you a spread there of the top 10. Next slide. Okay, so we're now starting to kind of track the PRs across all the repositories instead of just focusing on the main repository, what was previously the main repository there. So this pie chart shows the bugs, enhancements, and various types of PRs merged across the Manageiq repo, all the provider repos, the 2 UI repos, and the content repo. So as you can see there, almost half were bugs, 10% enhancements, and 12% tech debt, and 16% refactoring. So a healthy spread there. Next slide, please. It seems that something happened last sprint. We're not sure what, whether the accounting was wrong or something actually happened, so we're still kind of scratching our heads on that one. But this sprint, we're back to our normal numbers. In fact, it's a new high for PRs merged. And on the bottom there, you can also see there are 2 things there. One is the sprint number, 52, 53, 54, etc. And then next to it is another number, and that's the number of repositories that we have in the organization. So as you can see, they're kind of growing from 52 to 60. We've added 11 repositories, mostly from splitting code out of the main repository. And I think the next repository to be split out is the schema repository. So all the migrations and the SQL schema will go into its own repository. That will allow us to run tests better and stuff. So that's really the focus of that. All right, next slide, please. All right, so something new, starting with a sprint, health report on the main repos that we're tracking. So on the left there is the repository name. Then we have the number of files in each repository. Quite surprised to see the classic UI outpace the main repo. That's cool. And the number of files. Then the next 2 items there are the code climate GPA score, which is an automated metric for measuring the code quality. And the other one is the number of code climate issues, so another view on the quality of the code in each of the repos. And then on the right there is the test coverage. So none of them are in terrible shape, except for the main repository, which we can't measure until we split out the SQL schema into its own repo. But in general, kind of look at these and try to improve each repository on all those health scores. Next slide, please. All right, over to John.
Last week we had the fine release candidate. shipped, and then we had last week in Manageiq blog entries. Prior week was Drew Ullman, and she wrote a massive novel. It was huge, and she always does a great job. I think this is her like fifth entry, and she's continuing to provide for us enter blogs, even though she's somewhere else. And this week was David Halas, and we had upcoming events, OSCAL in the second week of May at Toronto, Albany. And David Halas is going to be doing that talk, and as well as Roman and David are going to man the Manageiq booth. And then there's an Open Expo on June 1st in Madrid, Spain, and Sergio and Carol are going to man the booth there and do a meetup as well. So that's it. Next slide.
All right, this is Dan talking about the classic UI, and in an attempt to streamline this meeting a little bit, we're going to only be talking about like major accomplishments going forward. We're going to see how that works out. Hopefully all the groups can do that and we can get this meeting a little more streamlined. So basically I have the obligatory chart, but this is pretty important. I mean, you can see that we're more than half concentrated on bugs. So really, if I was going to show you anything, I'd have to like go through lists of bugs, which nobody wants to do. Okay, so all I've got to talk about though is the next slide, which Karel Hala is going to discuss, and it's a big refactoring that was done and improvement to the UI. He basically replaced all of our list views with Angular support, and it's a one step closer to changing all those list views to using the REST API behind that Angular support. So this was a big long time amount of work that he's been working on for quite a while. We finally got that into the upstream, and I'm going to let Karel talk about it. Next slide, please.
Okay, hello. I'm Karel, and I'm part of middleware UI team. As been said, I've been working on porting of GTLs to Angular. The GTL is abbreviation for grid, tiles, and list. And you can find the code responsible for styling these components in separate repo in UI components, which is more aligned with patternfly styling and can be furthermore improved much easily and much faster. Plus, it can be shared amongst multiple Manageiq applications. So the data for each report is fetched from new endpoint. It's called report data. This should be written in near future to be part of API. Currently, this endpoint requires to receive selected model, selected items, a parent model, active tree, pagination settings, and if it's Explorer or not. The whole logic of fetching current view, pages, and such is handled by these variables. Which is big improvement is that you no longer have to refresh whole page if you are not in part of Explorer. If you change page and if you change paging and sorting and such, so this has been a big improvement. If you also want to work with the data via JavaScript, I provided small JavaScript API which will be improved. Basically, this was asked by QA to be part of it. We'll continue on improving these changes by removing the refresh of whole screen if user changes view from grid, tile, and list. And also, we already started on work on changing the pager to be more user-friendly. Okay, next slide, please. This is how it looks like. The center part is managed by Angular. As you can see, it's more aligned with Patternfly, and on the bottom, its new pagination as well, working on in Angular and more aligned with Kotlin 5. Okay, so if you find any bugs, regardless of these parts of application, please ping me on Gitter. It's Karol Holla. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Karol. Next slide. Chris?
Sorry, my mouse arrow disappeared. Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everyone. We've got some good updates to share with you this review, but before I dive into those, I had a few quick stats I wanted to share with you regarding this sprint. Overall, the sprint was still focused on bug fixes, so all in all, we completed 37 stories. Of those, 24 were bugs, we had 5 enhancements, and 8 housekeeping/tech debt tasks. Next slide, please. So diving into the new features, the first one was written by Alan Wright. He updated the notifications to handle batch notifications better. As some of you had seen, when a batch operation was done, the user would get spammed with notices. Next slide, please. Now, what will happen is it'll only show you a max of 6 notices, and then you'll get a message to check the notification drawer. Next slide, please. And of course, when the user expands the notification drawer, they'll see all the messages organized by categories, success, failed. This uses the pattern fly notification drawer component, which is the same component the classic UI uses. So that'll help the two UIs be closely aligned as notifications change in the future. Next slide, please. The next new feature is by Chris Hale, which is the utilization graphs on the My Services page. They'll currently roll up the average utilization for your VM resources for a particular service. This should allow end users to get a quick glance of their status without having to dig through the VM details screen. Next slide, please. The last new feature for this sprint is the RBAC control for the VM details page, which was written by Alan Wright. Now each section is controlled by RBAC, so as you can see in the screenshot on the right, we've got a user who has full permissions, and then on the left you can see that they're missing some permissions, which then limits what they actually will see in the service or the VM details page. Next slide, please. Of course, like I previously mentioned, the focus of this release was bug fixes. I'm not going to bore you with each of them. They're, of course, listed in the changelog in our repository, but they were mostly focused on either style or alignment issues that had popped up in the course of development. Lastly, we did have a few chore tasks that might be of interest. We added some new Yarn commands that will actually update the language files in the code as opposed to a manual process. And this is kind of the first step we needed to do to completely automate the language updates in the service UI. And as usual, we have updated our dependencies. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gregg. Next slide, please. Or Adam.
Thanks, Chris. So I'll be covering the providers changes for this sprint. There are a lot of great PRs across all the repositories. I'll call out a couple of highlights from Amazon, OpenStack, Overt, Ansible, and Hawkular. Next slide, please. So here I tried to capture the breakdown of the reasons for some of the PRs across all the provider repositories. So you can see we got a really healthy mix of bugs, enhancements, refactoring. One thing I thought was interesting, it kind of depended on the particular provider. Some were really heavy on bug fixes, some were really heavy on refactoring and enhancements. So it looks like it's nicely spread out here, but per provider it tended to slide one way or the other. Next slide, please. So here are the PRs per repository. So as usual, Amazon's leading the pack here with 28 PRs. VMware, Ansible Tower, and Hawkular kind of rounding out the top. Next slide, please. So Amazon had the most probably enhancements in refactoring. Lattice added CloudWatch events, so you can see those in the VM timelines now. The XLab guys added support for deleting S3 folders, which was labeled as a bug, but I thought it was a nice enhancement to be able to do that, really just spreading out support for S3 objects. And we got some refreshing floating IPs for a load balancer that Lattice added, and did a lot of great refactoring and cleanup around the refresh parsers. There were some of the original ones converted to the newer graph refresh, And as things changed, I think he kind of went back and cleaned things up to match the current state of the art there. Next slide, please. So Ansible was almost all bugs. The team there has been doing a really great job knocking out a lot of blockers and high priority bugs for the next coming release. A notable enhancement was allowing you to do privilege escalation when you're running an Ansible playbook. Next slide. And over the Rev team, they've been really fixing a lot of corner cases around host targeted refresh. There are a couple here, I think, mostly around if you are doing a targeted refresh of a host that doesn't have any VMs. So if you migrated all VMs off of the host, there was an issue there. And they also fixed ISO provisioning. And OpenStack, they allowed you to be able to, in provisioning, connect any network to a VM. There were some allowed network filtering that wasn't really applicable to OpenStack. So now you can select any cloud network and attach it to a VM when you're provisioning it in OpenStack. Next slide. And a Hawkular team moved to using the new Hawkular Next inventory. So really just staying on the cutting edge of how Hawkular is collecting inventory. And now you can visualize cross-link container topology, which is pretty cool. And for Lenovo, the physical side, they added server location LED collection to the refresh parser. So now we're collecting that as well. That's it. Next slide. Over to Greg M. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, person surprisingly not named Greg.
Break it up.
So, as you, like everyone else, mostly bugs in this sprint, a couple of enhancements, and you'd see quite a bit of tech debt covered in this sprint. That's, I think, mostly Brandon trying to get his PR count up as we're splitting repos, kind of moving stuff to where it logically needs to be, and kind of cleaning up a lot of kind of gem and unwinding some of the stuff from the massive repo. So a lot of good tech debt covered in the sprint. But we did get a few enhancements. So next slide. The first one, this is also Brandon, Brandon and Jason created the new repo for the automation engine. So the things that moved in there are the engine and all the service models that most people tend to interact with those. So if you do need to make service model changes, you need to go to the new repo. And it's testing on 2.4 now, and yeah, it's nice to have that split out. I think for the main repo, it probably means a dramatic decrease in timing to run tests, so that's good for everyone else. The second point here is kind of initial work. Madhu added new columns for embedded methods. So this is starting to attack the issue of not being able to share code between automate methods. So there's some more work to do here. We have another PR and then some UI work, but we want to expose the ability to reference other methods that will get loaded as part of the script. So then you can write methods or classes that can then be accessed from your script in one place and reuse them throughout the different methods. So this is the initial work to get the migration in place. Madhu has the PR for the second half, and then again UI work. And we added the quota checking for VM reconfigure. This was kind of marked as a bug, but really is more of an enhancement request. It's been missing for a long time. It differences, where the VM is today and what the request is. So it's checking against, the delta for the request. And next slide, please. And here, that Adam guy stole my thunder, as his predecessor Gregg likes to do each week. So at the bottom, we added the escalate privilege flag. We found that we enabled this in credentials, but hadn't added it here. So when you go to run the playbook and the credential asks for escalation, it promptly fails. So we added this check in here to obviously support that functionality. And then just one other enhancement was just some improved logging around the extra bars that we're passing to Ansible as part of the processing for the help with debugging. And that's it for Automate. Greg?
Thank you, Greg.
That's how it's supposed to get.
Yeah. Okay, so you could see here on this chart as well, mostly bugs. I won't go through all the bugs, enhancements, and refactorings either, but I pulled out some of the more important, interesting ones. Next slide, please. So Shimon's removed the default certificate that we ship on the appliance. So now it's basically we auto-generate one, a unique one, each time when we launch the appliance, so that on first launch, of course, so that then it's different for every appliance, and they won't be sharing the same certificate. Also, Libor did some work. I'm sorry, this was Tim. Exposing guest applications for reporting. Something that we hadn't had before, but it's useful because for being able to report like on a version of something, it was difficult to come in through VMs and then look for something on guest applications because of the way we display all the rows. For each VM, you display all the guest applications. There was no way to filter that out. So it just simplifies that, so you can basically find a certain type of application and maybe a version of something, and then report the VMs that are running that. So it's kind of the other way around. Next slide, please. So some bug fixes here. Libor's done some more work in RBAC, basically restricting user and group management based on role. There were some tenant admin roles that we want to prevent them from being able to escalate privileges by adding roles that are above what they can do. And then a couple fixes for being able to restore the database in an environment where you're running replication. So PG Logical was holding a connection open to the database that was preventing the restore from working. So we removed that and added some logic to wait for the connection to quiesce and go away, and then let you do the restore. And that was a blocker. Next slide, please. And some more technical debt refactoring test related stuff. Tim extracted a bunch of stuff from MIQ expression. It's all the lists of classes and subclasses that we support for reporting and expressions, and he put that into a YAML, something that surprisingly hadn't been done, a long time ago. And Yuri's he's been doing a lot of work on cleaning up refactoring jobs and tasks, and he's removed the reference of GUID actually completely, I think, as of next sprint from jobs. And some specs for custom attributes, chargeback. And that's it. I'll turn it over to Alberto.
Great, thanks, Greg. So on the API side, we had the usual bugs and refactoring done. For enhancements, we have the custom actions were introduced for VMs by Tim. So this works similar to what we have today for services. You can fetch the custom action definitions, the actual buttons for a VM via regular get, and the attributes shown here, custom actions, custom action buttons. And as far as triggering those, it's a regular, presents itself as a regular API action, posting that on the VM resource and the standard action signature. And that's it for the API. Off to Dennis for performance.
Yeah, first let me apologize. This is the wrong slide. This is from the last review. For this sprint, the Reports Explorer page was enhanced by reducing the number of queries. In the test environment, the number of queries was reduced from about 150 to 23 on the initial page load. And with expanding all the nodes, queries went down from 805 to 444, so about half. The net result was that page now loads in about a second when it was closer to 4 seconds before that. Next slide, please.
Hi, this is Chris. This past sprint, we merged 13 requests, the majority of which were enhancements. As we can see in the highlights, we've added content on configuring Manageiq to work with load balancers, adding procedures to outline how to refresh Ansible repositories, how to enable the Ansible server role. There are several ones related to the Ansible role. We've got stuff on the container roles, topology for viewing providers, and some information on group priority, among some other stuff. And that's about it.
All right. Well, that wraps up this sprint. We'll have our next sprint demo in 2 weeks. And I don't see any questions on the chat. I'm assuming there's no questions on the phone either. If there's not, I want to say thank you, and we'll see everyone in 2 weeks.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks.